My son placed his wife's $400,000 debt in front of me like an ordinary bill. "Don't disappoint me, Mom," he said condescendingly. "We need to pay this debt." I just smiled and poured him my coffee while he checked his messages on his phone. 5 hours later, I had emptied my account. When they returned that evening to collect the money, they found the house empty and only saw a letter on the table. When they opened it, they were disappointed. The doorbell rang at 8:30 a.m. on a regular Wednesday morning, 3 insistent knocks, as if the world were falling apart. I knew who it was even before I opened the door. My son Richard only appeared unannounced when he needed something. I left my coffee half-finished on the kitchen table and walked slowly down the hallway. Through the living room window, I saw a luxury pickup truck parked haphazardly in the entryway. Richard had inherited his father's talent for business, but he lacked patience and kindness. When I opened the door, he walked in, his cell phone in one hand and a brown envelope in the other. His face, always his father's, was tense. "Mom," he said without a hug, and he moved quickly to the table. "We need to talk." Richard walked straight into the kitchen as if he still lived here, even though he'd moved in over 18 years ago. He sat in my chair, placed the envelope on the table, and continued scrolling through his phone as I watched him. "A coffee would go a long way," he murmured, never taking his eyes off the screen. I served the coffee mechanically. Even though I'd been a widow for 10 years, I still served the men in my life as if that were my only function. As I set the cup down in front of her, I noticed how tense his hands looked. "Fiona okay? The kids?" I was asking about my daughter-in-law and the grandchildren I'd barely seen. "They're doing just fine," Richard replied. Finally, he put the phone back in his pocket and took a sip of coffee. "I'll get straight to the point, Mom. I have a problem." I sat across from him at the table. The clock ticked slowly by. "Fiona got into a difficult situation," he continued, pushing the envelope towards me. "She made some investments, but they didn't work out." I carefully opened the envelope. Inside were bank statements, foreclosure notices, and what looked like a loan agreement with a figure marked in red. 400,000. My heart raced. It was almost my entire retirement savings, plus whatever was left from the sale of our apartment in downtown Monterey after Edward's death. "Richard," I said, my throat dry, "this is almost all I have." He took another sip. His cold eyes finally met mine. "Mom, it's not as if you need that money. You live alone in this already paid-off house. Your expenses are minimal, and you're 70, for God's sake. What good is your savings?" His words hit me like a slap in the face. The house was the only valuable possession I had left, and even that was still his. A decision Edward made years ago to avoid dealing with his inheritance. "It's not that simple," I protested. "I have my medication, my checkups." Richard interrupted me, tapping the table. "Fiona made the wrong investment." "Okay, she trusted the wrong person. If we don't pay this off by tomorrow," he took a deep breath, "things are going to get worse. They're not bankers, Mom. They're dangerous people." "What kind of dangerous people?" My voice was almost gone. "You don't need to know the details," he said impatiently. "Just trust me. This is a loan, right? I'll pay you back as soon as I get the company finances sorted." I thought of the envelope, my son's face, the door to the backyard where he once played. Now it was like a stranger in my kitchen. "You've asked me for a loan before, Richard. I've never seen the color of that money." His face hardened. "This is serious, Mom. This isn't the time for drama." He paced the kitchen like a caged animal. "I'm your only son, your family. You always told me you'd do anything." There it was, that all too familiar manipulation, the technique Edward used, and the one I'd allowed my whole life. "I need to think," I said softly. "There's no time for thinking." He raised his voice. "That money needs to be in my account by the end of the day. Tomorrow is too late." He stood behind my chair and put his hands on my shoulders. I felt his weight like chains. "Mom," he said, his voice softening, "I wouldn't ask if it weren't important. This is for Fiona's safety and the safety of our family." Family. That magic word he always used to unravel. The one that made me bow down, give up, sacrifice. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll transfer." The relief on Richard's face was palpable. He smiled for the first time since he arrived. A smile that reminded me of the boy he once was. Thanks, Mom. I knew I could trust you. He checked his watch. I have a meeting now, but I'll be back for dinner and we'll figure it out. Okay. I nodded, speechless. Richard picked up the file, gave me a quick kiss on the forehead, and headed for the door. Don't let me down, Mom, he added as he left, as if I were the girl and he was the father. The door slammed shut, and I was left in the kitchen with his half-finished coffee, certain that I'd just made a huge mistake. Through the window, I saw his car speed away, sending gravel flying across the garden. How carefully I'd tended that garden. At that moment, an idea the old Myers would never have considered began to form in my mind. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in a long time. Marilyn, this is Myers. I need your help. My friend arrived in less than half an hour. It had been almost 50 years since I met Marilyn in college. She had become a lawyer. I had dropped out to get married. She never approved of my choices, but she always stayed close, waiting patiently for me to open my eyes. 400,000. The tea I offered her almost choked. Myers, this is crazy. That's all you have. I nodded, feeling the weight of the truth. Not the first time, Marilyn. $100,000 last year to expand the business. $50,000 before that to resolve issues with suppliers. None of that money ever came back. Marilyn slammed the glass down on the table. So why are you still giving, Myers? You've always been smart. How can you not see what's going on? I was struck by the question. Why did I keep going? Love, fear, habit? He's my son, I said, the usual automatic response. And you're his mother, not his bank, Marilyn replied. Edward manipulated you for 30 years. Now Richard is on the same path. When will this end? Alone, I looked at the garden I'd cultivated after Edward's death. The roses were finally blooming, after years of toiling in unsuitable soil. Like me, pushing the seemingly impossible. Today, I said, to my own astonishment. It will be over today. Marilyn looked into my eyes, then a slow smile crossed her face. Myers menaces, I've been waiting to hear something like that from you for almost 50 years. She pulled her phone from her bag. I have a summer apartment in Cancun, and it's vacant. The keys are in my office. How much time do we have until he gets back? He said he'd be coming over for dinner about 10 hours. Marilyn checked the clock. Enough. First we'll go to the bank. Then you'll give me power of attorney at the notary, so I can represent you legally if necessary. Then we'll pack our bags and leave. I stood up, fear mixed with excitement. I had never made such a radical decision in my life. He'll be furious, I muttered, mostly to myself. Marilyn took my hands. Myers, are you afraid of him? I thought of the look on my son's face when he didn't get what he wanted. The way his voice changed, his eyes hardened. Yes, I said. I'm afraid of him, just like his father. Then it's time to stop being afraid. Her hands tightened. Let's get your things. In my room, I grabbed the suitcase I'd used only twice in 10 years. I opened the closet and started choosing clothes, but I soon realized I didn't want to take much with me. Just the essentials, a few clothes, my medications, jewelry, shoes, important documents, and a few pieces of jewelry with sentimental value. At the bottom of my closet drawer, I found the small wooden box where I kept the only money Edward had ever known. It wasn't much. I'd saved a few $1,000s over the years selling sweets and embroidery. My secret, my little rebellion. I picked up the framed photo of my mother and looked at the picture of Richard as a child. I didn't take it, I just left it there. When I returned to the living room, Marilyn was organizing everything on the phone. There's a 4 o'clock flight to Cancun. We still have time to go to the bank and the notary. At the bank, my request to transfer all my money to a new account surprised the manager. Ms. Meneses, are you sure? It's a significant amount. Absolutely, I said as I signed the paperwork. And I want this transaction to not appear on the account statements sent to my address. As we waited for the transfer to be processed, Marilyn asked curiously, What will you leave for Richard? An explanation. I thought for a moment. A note, I said finally. And a lesson he should have learned long ago. Back home, I carefully wrote a piece of paper on the kitchen table and placed it there. I'm the one who disappointed you. Revenge is a dish best served cold. As I walked out the door with my suitcase, I took one last look at the house that had been my prison for so many years. I had practically given my life to this house. I couldn't let it go. In the taxi to the airport, Marilyn held my hand. "Are you okay?" I looked out the window at the city rushing by, all those years fading away. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be." Marilyn's Cancun apartment was small but cozy, with a sea view. The first night, as I listened to the waves on my balcony, I answered my phone and saw 20 missed calls from Richard, so I hung up. I wasn't ready to face him. "He'll find you sooner or later," Marilyn said, handing me a glass of wine. "We need a long-term plan." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm. I never thought I'd have the courage to do this. Marilyn smiled. "He always did. You just needed a little push." For days afterward, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Richard, his wife Fiona, even my sister Clara, who had probably been assigned to find me. One of Richard's voicemails alternated between desperate pleas and veiled threats. "Mom, please call. I'm worried. You can't just disappear. The house is in my name, you remember? Think carefully about what you're doing." A week after I escaped, I started building my new life. I opened a new bank account, rented a small apartment near the beach, and looked for something to occupy my time. At 70, I'd never really worked, but I found my sweets and embroidery had buyers at the local arts and crafts market. Marilyn stayed in Mexico City, but she remained my watchful eye. She was the one who alerted me to Richard's furious arrival at his office. "He was beside himself," she said on the phone. "He threatened to know where you were, threatened you with legal action, said you were mentally incompetent to make financial decisions, and said he would have you placed under guardianship. So what did you say?" I told him he was perfectly sane and that if he continued making threats, I would get a restraining order. Marilyn laughed. She blushed. I guess no one had ever stood up to him before. By the end of the first month, I received a formal letter from Richard's lawyer. He demanded my immediate return, expressed concern for my mental health, and threatened custody. In the same envelope was a note from Fiona, written in surprisingly modest handwriting. "Myers, please come back. Richard is out of control. Creditors are pressing. We need you." I forwarded the documents to Marilyn, who prepared the formal response, including recent medical reports confirming my health and a detailed account of the debts Richard had extorted from me over the years. "They have no lawsuits," Marilyn assured me, "but Richard won't give up easily. He's lost his personal bank. This will drive him crazy." In the second month, an unexpected visitor arrived. My daughter-in-law, Fiona, appeared at my door, pale and visibly thin. "How did you find me?" I asked in surprise. "We've hired a detective," she said, looking a little embarrassed. "May I come in?" I hesitated, but I allowed her. She looked curiously around my small apartment. "It's a warm place," she said, seeming surprised I was living in such a modest place after leaving my spacious house. "It's me," I said simply. From the balcony, the sea was visible on the horizon. Fiona was holding her cup with trembling hands. "Myers, things are bad," she said finally. "Richard is different, aggressive, losing control." "How are my grandchildren?" I asked guiltily. "They're scared. They don't understand what's happening. Richard sold the car. We're trying to sell the beachfront apartment too. It's all to pay off debts." She paused. "It wasn't just the 400,000, Myers. There's a lot more." I wasn't surprised. Edward always had an extra debt too. "So you didn't come here to get me back," I said. "You came to ask for more money." Fiona lowered her eyes. "It's more complicated. The men we owe money to aren't patient. Richard told them you had the money." A chill ran down my spine. "He used me as collateral." Fiona didn't answer, but her silence was clear enough. "You need to get out of that house, Fiona," I said, taking her hands. "Take the children and go home to your family." "It's not that simple," she murmured. "Richard controls everything. Our accounts, our documents." Her voice trembled. "I don't know how I got out either." Her words shook me to my core. It was true. For years I didn't know how to get out either, until I finally found the courage. "I can help you," I said. "Not with money, but with getting you out." Fiona's eyes held a mixture of hope and fear. "He'll find us, just as he found you. When he does, we'll be prepared." I said with a confidence I felt for the first time. But first, we have to get you and the children out of this house. After Fiona left, I watched the sunset from the balcony, hatching a plan and hiding my new phone number in my boot. The orange horizon was a symbol of my own transformation. My phone rang. It was Marilyn. Fiona found you, didn't she? She asked bluntly. How do you know? Richard was in my office again, this time with one of his creditors. A scary man with scars on his face. They made veiled threats to know where you were. My stomach sank. What did you say? I told them if they touched you, me, or anyone else involved, I would make sure they spent the rest of their lives behind bars. A brief pause. Myers, this is getting dangerous. Richard is desperate. I know, I said, watching the last light fade on the horizon. And desperate people do desperate things. The next morning, I woke to an insistent knocking at the door. For a moment I thought Richard had found me, but when I looked through the binoculars, I saw a woman I didn't recognize. Mrs. Myers Meneses? I opened the door halfway, keeping the chain secure. Yes. I'm Detective Grant, he said, showing his ID. Plainclothes officer, we need to talk about your son, Richard Meneses. My heart raced. Is something wrong? The detective's expression remained neutral. May I come in? I let him in and offered him coffee, which he accepted. I tried to suppress the trembling of my hands as I fixed the cups in the small kitchen. Mrs. Meneses, he said, sitting down on the couch, your son is being investigated for financial fraud, forgery, and possible connections to loan sharks. We need to know if you are aware of these activities. It was as if the ground shifted beneath my feet. Part of me had always known Richard was dishonest in his dealings, like his father, but hearing the words police investigation made it all seem terrifyingly real. No, I said honestly. I knew he had financial problems, but I didn't know the extent or the nature of them. The detective made notes in his notebook. You left home suddenly 2 months ago, is that correct? Can you tell me why? I told him everything. The string of debts, the manipulations, the pressure for $4 million. The detective listened intently, making small notes here and there. Did he make me sign any documents bearing your name? Were there any he made me sign without explaining what they were? I thought. A few years ago, he asked me to sign some documents to facilitate financial transfers in my old age. He said it was for my protection. The detective nodded. We found suspicious transactions on accounts in your name, which you probably didn't even know existed, Ms. Meneses. I closed my eyes. A wave of nausea came over me. Richard hadn't just manipulated me. He had used my identity. What now? I tried to maintain my composure. We will continue the investigation. We will need your official statement soon. He paused. Your son is likely to be formally charged in the coming weeks. Considering the people involved, it would be wise to increase your security. After the detective left, I called Marilyn. She promised to be on the next plane to Cancun. I knew Richard was shady, she said, but I never thought it would come to this. That afternoon, a text came from Fiona. He found out about our plan. I'm locked in the room with the kids. He's breaking everything. My blood ran cold. I called Detective Grant immediately. He promised to send a team to Richard's address. The hours that followed were blurred by calls, texts, and fragmentary updates. By nightfall, all I knew was that Fiona and my grandchildren were in a safe haven, and Richard had been taken into custody for questioning after resisting the police. Marilyn arrived around 9 p.m. to find me on the balcony, gazing out at the dark sea. She sat down next to me, and we were silent for several minutes. How are you feeling? She asked finally. Guilty, I said. If I hadn't left, this might not have happened. Marilyn shook her head firmly. No, Myers. If you hadn't left, you would have been going down with him. You would probably have been used in more scams. You did the only thing you could do. You saved yourself. And in doing so, you probably saved Fiona and your grandchildren too. The next morning, the headline in the local newspaper took my breath away. Businessman arrested for fraud, criminal connections. The photo of Richard being led away in handcuffs by police seemed to belong to another reality. The phone rang. Detective Grant. Mrs. Meneses, your son wants to see you at the police station. He insists on speaking only to you. Marilyn, who had already read the news, looked worried. You don't have to go, she said. After what you've put him through. I have to go, I said, surprised. I have to look him in the eye and end this once and for all. The police station was cold and impersonal. The fluorescent lights accentuated every wrinkle in my tired face. Richard was brought in, handcuffed, in a gray uniform. He looked smaller, older. Tears welled up in his eyes when he saw me, so much like his father's. Mom, he said, his voice breaking. You're here. I sat across from him, keeping my distance. You wanted to see. I'm here. Richard was like a trapped animal. He looked around as if searching for an escape. Don't you understand my situation? He snapped, leaning forward. Those people don't joke around. If I don't pay my debt. No, I interrupted. I was surprisingly calm. You're the one who doesn't understand. I'm not here to lend money, Richard. That time is over. The vulnerability on his face turned to anger. You failed me when I needed you most. Your own family. Why are you going to tell your grandchildren about this? That their father was left to rot in prison. I took a deep breath, refusing to allow the manipulation again. I'll tell them that their father made bad choices just like their grandfather, and that I finally made the right one. Richard slammed his cuffed hands on the table. The house is in my hands. You own nothing. I own myself, I said, standing. I almost lost it all, because of you and your father. I walked to the door, then stopped and turned. Fiona and the kids are safe. They'll have a chance to start over away from you. A brief pause. Me too. As we left the police station, a huge weight felt lifted off my shoulders. The Cancun sun was blindingly bright through the artificial lights inside. Marilyn was waiting in the car. How did it go? He asked anxiously. Liberating, I said, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a genuine smile. 6 months had passed since my escape and Richard's arrest. Winter had brought harsh winds and turbulent seas to Cancun. My small apartment truly felt like a home now. The plants I grew on the balcony and the colorful embroidery I sold at the market adorned the walls. Fiona and my grandchildren, Luke, 8 and Marianne, 6, moved to a town in inland Jalisco, closer to her family. We had weekly video calls. I'd learned with Marilyn's help. The children were adjusting to their new life, though they still occasionally asked about their father. Grandma, when can we visit you? Luke asked during our last conversation. During July break, I promised. We'll build sandcastles and collect seashells. Fiona came on screen, smiling shyly. She looked healthier. Her cheeks were fuller, her gaze calmer. Are you really inviting us, Myers? Of course. My apartment is small but will fit. The children's laughter will be good for them. I was lost in thought as I watched the sunset. Richard's trial was scheduled for next month. The charges were serious. Fraud, forgery, criminal activity. Marilyn had been waiting at least 10 years. I had agreed to testify, not for revenge but for justice for myself, Fiona, and everyone Richard had deceived over the years. The phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Myers Meneses? An unfamiliar male voice. Yes, who? Your son's lawyer, Rodrigo Mason. My chest tightened. Richard had changed lawyers several times in recent months, each promising miracles that never materialized. Go ahead. Richard wants to offer a deal. He has information about larger operations that might interest the prosecution. He'll talk in exchange for a reduced sentence, but he needs your help. I took a deep breath. I knew where it was going. Financial assistance for his private legal team, of course. 200,000 pesos. I almost laughed. The audacity was incomprehensible. Mr. Mason, I don't have that amount. Even if I did, I wouldn't use it like this. Ms. Myers. Her voice hardened. Your son is facing over 10 years in prison. As a mother, I interrupted. I've been the best I could for decades. Now Richard must face the consequences of his own actions. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. He said you would respond that way, she said. He still has copies of the papers you signed, documents that could implicate you. My stomach nodded, but my voice remained steady. Tell my son he'll have another crime to add to his blackmail list. I'm prepared to face any charge if it means breaking the cycle. I hung up with trembling hands. I called Marilyn immediately and explained. He's bluffing, she said firmly. Whatever you signed, the police said it was coerced into signing. Besides, the investigation has already established a pattern of his behavior. Still, that night was difficult. I ran through all the papers Richard or Edward had made me sign over the years. How many contracts, how many powers of attorney, how many documents I hadn't even read properly, trusting them to have my best interests at heart. The next morning there was a knock at the door. Detective Grant and another officer. Ms. Meneses, you need to come to the police station. There's a new development in your son's case. On the way, she explained that Richard had tried to bribe a guard to smuggle a phone into his cell. The guard was part of the internal operation and had recorded the entire thing. At the station, they showed me a transcript of a call she'd made as soon as she had the phone. As collateral, I'll give you my mother's address in Cancun, she told one of the men she owed money to. My mother has hidden money. If I can't pay her back, you know where to find it. I felt a chill run through my bones as I read the words. My own son was willing to risk my life to save his own. Ms. Meneses, the detective said softly. In light of this new evidence, we're offering temporary police protection and strongly recommend that you consider moving. I returned home with another police escort. Marilyn was already there. She'd heard from the detective. She hugged me as soon as I entered. I'm looking for a new place for you, she said. A gated community. I looked around my small apartment, at the plants I carefully tended, the colorful curtains I'd planted, the view that brought me peace every morning. No, I said, surprising myself. I won't escape again. I won't let Richard control my life, even from behind bars. Marilyn's gaze held concern and admiration. Myers, those men are dangerous. I know. We'll take all the necessary precautions. But this is my home now. For the first time in my life, a place I've truly chosen. I won't give up. Within days we had installed a full security system. Cameras, alarms, reinforced locks. The police increased patrols in the neighborhood. 2 plainclothes officers took turns parking in front of the building. Fiona, informed of the situation, called in a panic. Myers, come here. Please stay with us. I'm safe, I soothed. And I have a life here. My craft markets, my friends, my swimming lessons for the elderly. I laughed lightly. At 70, I discovered who I was when I stopped looking at ungrateful men. A week later, the subpoena for Richard's trial arrived. It was 2 weeks later. Marilyn was staying with me in Cancun. She reviewed the subpoena. Are you ready for this? Facing him in court won't be easy. I looked out the window at the sea, which had become my confidant. I'm ready. The courthouse was an imposing building in the heart of Mexico City. It was my first time back in the city since my escape. The streets I'd lived in for years felt foreign to me. Marilyn was driving and I was taking in the view. Are you nervous? He asked as we parked. It's strange, but I'm not, I said. It's like I'm closing a chapter. Before the hearing, the intelligent, middle-aged prosecutor stopped by. Ms. Meneses, your testimony is very critical today. He's a master at portraying himself as the victim, I said. The side door opened and Richard entered between 2 guards. He was thinner, his eyes hollow. Our eyes met, his gaze pleading, mine determined. Everyone stood when the judge entered. First the procedural, then the expert testimony, which explained the intricacies of Richard's financial schemes. When it was my turn, I walked slowly but firmly to the bench. I swore an oath. The prosecutor began. Ms. Meneses, could you describe your relationship with the defendant and your son? I looked at Richard and spoke. After my husband died 10 years ago, I raised him alone. Before that, we were just a seemingly normal family. What do you mean? My husband, Edward, Richard's father, was financially manipulative and controlling. Richard learned from the best. The prosecutor nodded. Can you tell me how your son manipulated you financially? I told him all about it. The endless debts, the broken promises, the emotional pressure, the subtle blackmail. In the last incident, he demanded almost all of my savings, 400,000 pesos, to pay off his wife's debt. When I realized I would never see the money back, just like before, I decided to leave. What led you to this decision after years of submitting to his demands? I thought. The contempt in his voice, I said honestly. When he said, "Don't disappoint me, Mom," I knew he didn't see me as a person, but as a resource to be exploited. In that moment, something inside me broke and transformed into something else. Richard's lawyer stood for cross-examination. An expensive suit, a calculated expression. "Ms. Meneses, do you consider yourself a good mother?" The question caught him by surprise. The prosecutor was about to object, but I held up a hand to stop him. For decades, I thought a good mother meant giving her son everything. Money, time, self-respect. Now I see. Being a good mother also includes teaching responsibility and consequences. "You abandoned your son when he needed him most," he pressed. "No, sir. I stopped facilitating destructive behavior." "There's a big difference. The threats you allege your son made against you? Don't you think it's telling that they came by chance, just as I was trying to make a deal with the prosecution?" I remained calm. The record speaks for itself. What's telling is that my son gave my address to mafia-type figures to secure his debts. That's not that. It's tragic. My legs were shaking as I stepped off the bench. Marilyn squeezed my hand. The hearing continued with testimony from Richard's employees, victimized clients, and Fiona, who recounted years of lies and manipulation. Richard grew more agitated by the minute, whispering angrily to his lawyer. When the judge adjourned until the next morning, Richard looked at me once more. No more pleading, just an icy hatred that chilled me. I couldn't sleep at the hotel that night. The look on his face haunted me. The mixed anger and calculation that settled on Edward's face when he didn't get what he wanted. The next morning, we went back to court for the final words. The prosecutor laid out a powerful narrative of years of fraud and manipulation. Richard's lawyer tried to paint him as a difficult businessman. The judge retired to his sentence. Marilyn and I got coffee at a nearby cafe. As I absent-mindedly twirled my spoon, I noticed a man watching us a few tables away. When our eyes met, he turned his head. "Marilyn," I whispered. "That man is watching us." He glanced back, keeping a low profile. He could be a journalist. This case has gotten a lot of attention in the local media. But the man's posture, his evasive gaze, and the vague way he was following us gave me goosebumps. "Let's get back to court," I said. He got up as we left. He kept his distance on the way back, but he didn't let us go. I explained the situation to a police officer in court, and he promised to be careful. The courtroom reopened. The judge returned and announced the verdict. In the case of State versus Richard Edward Meneses, the defendant is found guilty of all charges. A warmth coursed through me, followed by a profound sadness. The child I had once held was now a convicted felon. The judge announced the sentence. 12 years in prison, with the possibility of a conditional sentence after 4 years, fines, and restitution. Richard remained impassive. As the officers led him away, he turned to me. "This isn't over," he said, loud enough. "You'll regret it." As I left the courthouse, I saw the same man watching from afar again. This time, I pointed it out to the police officer accompanying him. He noticed and disappeared into the crowd. "We have to return to Cancun at the same time today," I told Marilyn. "I don't feel safe here." The week after the trial, I tried to settle back into my routine in Cancun. With Richard convicted and under close surveillance, his threats didn't seem to have carried much weight. His police escort was reduced to periodic patrols. One afternoon, returning from the market, I noticed an unfamiliar car near my building. Its windows were too dark, and it was parked strategically, overlooking the building's entrance. Instead of entering, I kept walking and called Detective Grant. "Maybe it's nothing," he said, "but it wouldn't hurt to check. Wait somewhere in the crowd." I went into a nearby cafe and watched from the window. 20 minutes later, the patrol arrived. 2 men got out of the car and tried to speed away. The police caught up. My phone rang. It was the detective. "Ms. Meneses, we've caught 2 criminals. They had illegal weapons and a piece of paper with your address in their pocket." A chill ran down my spine. Probably Richard's associates. "We're checking them out. Is there a safe place you could stay for a few days?" I called Marilyn and her response was quick and clear. "I'll pick you up in an hour. I have a beach house in Playa del Carmen that no one knows about." Escorted by the police, I returned to the apartment to collect my belongings. As I hurriedly packed a bag, I looked around back to the home I had built with so much love. I should run again or maybe not. A thought blossomed in my mind, an idea that had seemed absurd to the old Myers, but now it made sense. When Marilyn arrived, I explained the plan. It's risky, she said. Living in fear is riskier, I said. And I'm tired of hiding. The next day, instead of hiding in Playa del Carmen, I returned to my apartment with a clear objective. With the help of Detective Grant and his team, we set a trap. The two men captured had agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences. They told me Richard had hired a third party to contact another inmate's phone during visiting hours and scare me. Scare me was a euphemism for something much darker. He's really vulnerable, the detective said. He wants you to know he has power, even while he's still in prison. The plan was simple. I would continue my routine as if I were unaware, and undercover officers would monitor every move. If Richard's dispatcher showed up, he would be caught red-handed. I lived on high alert for 3 days. Every sound startled me. Every stranger on the street felt like a threat. On the 4th morning, while watering the plants on my balcony, I saw a man leaning against a post across the street, watching me. Our eyes met. I signaled to the undercover police cleaner who had come in and cleaned the living room. Him, I whispered. I'm sure. The man watched the building for about half an hour, then slowly made his way to the door. The doorman let another plainclothes officer in without question. I sat in the living room in the armchair opposite the door and waited. My heart was beating so fast I could hear it in my ears. The policeman was hidden in the bathroom, behind the slightly open door. The doorbell rang. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Mrs. Myers Meneses? He asked. An ordinary-looking man who could easily have been lost in the crowd. Yes. I have a message from your son. Before I could make a move, 3 police officers emerged from different points in the hallway and quickly subdued him. The man didn't resist. He seemed relieved to have been caught. Later that day, Detective Grant said he had confessed. Richard had promised him 5,000 pesos to scare his ungrateful mother. What does scare mean? I asked. The detective hesitated. Breaking things in your apartment, making verbal threats, and... He paused, leaving visible marks on you. Not murder, but enough to make you never feel safe again. My knees went weak. That means new charges for Richard. Yes, he said. Attempted assault, engaging a third party to commit the crime, threats. Probably eliminates your chance of parole for years. A week later, I visited Richard in prison. He was surprised to see me. He seemed to have not expected me to have the nerve to confront him again. I came to say goodbye, Richard, I said, sitting on either side of the glass. Goodbye. His brow furrowed. Yes. The person you hired to intimidate me confessed everything. You'll face new charges, and you'll probably stay a lot longer than you thought. I paused. But that's not why I came. I came to tell you I'm moving on. Richard laughed bitterly. What life? You're 70, Mom. You're alone. I'm free, I corrected. And I realize it's never too late to start over. You know what? I always thought of myself as Edward's wife or Richard's mother. Now I'm discovering who Myers is. He looked at me with an expression that mirrored his father's, this time one of mixed contempt and surprise. So who is Myers? I smiled warmly. A woman who has learned to value herself. A woman who is no longer afraid. Richard pounded on the window. You think it's over, but it's not. I'll be out someday. If that day comes, I'm ready, I said, standing up. Goodbye, Richard. When I left prison, a lightness I hadn't felt in years swept over me. The sky was an extraordinary blue that day. The air felt sweeter. Marilyn was waiting in the car. How was it? Liberating, I said. Truly liberating. A year after my escape, autumn brought hues of red and orange to Cancun. My embroidery business had grown. I now had 3 students a week, older women like me, coming to learn and, most of all, to chat. Fiona and my grandchildren visited me twice. Luke and Marion filled my apartment with laughter and energy. We built sandcastles on the beach and collected the seashells that adorned the balcony. Fiona was teaching in the new city, slowly regaining her confidence. Richard received another 3 years for his attempted deterrence. News of him came occasionally from Detective Grant, who had become my friend. As far as we knew, he was silent. Perhaps he had finally accepted his situation. One Saturday, as I was returning from Sunday, I saw a woman waiting at the door. She was in her 50s with graying hair, and a face somehow familiar. Myers Meneses? Yes. I'm Christina. Christine Adams. She paused. I was married to Edward before you. I was at a loss for words. Edward had only briefly mentioned his previous marriage. He described his ex-wife as unstable and obsessed with money. I now appreciated the irony. Would you like to come in? We sat in the small living room with 2 cups of tea. Christina explained why she'd come. I saw the article about Richard in the paper, how he manipulated you financially for years. Edward did the same with me. I knew I had to find you to close a circle. How did you find me? It wasn't hard. Your story spread through support groups for women experiencing financial abuse. You became a symbol of resistance. I couldn't hide my surprise. Me a symbol? Christina smiled. A woman who, at almost 70, left everything behind and started over, facing her own son in court. Yes, Myers, you have inspired so many. We talked for hours. She told me how Edward had isolated her from her family, how he controlled every penny, how he made her feel incapable of managing it. When he finally divorced her, he left her with next to nothing, and then he married me. Her story echoed mine. When he died, Christina said, I felt a strange mixture, relief and anger. Relief that he could no longer manipulate anyone. Anger that he had never been held accountable for his actions. I understand perfectly, I said. For a long time I had blamed Richard alone, but now I see that Edward had planted the seeds. My son watched what he saw at home. The cycle continues, Christina murmured. Unless someone breaks it. That afternoon we exchanged contact information and promised to stay in touch. After he left, I watched the sunset on the balcony and thought about our conversations. Edward and Richard, father and son, had left my life, one in death, the other in prison. Both had left scars that I am still trying to heal. That night, I wrote in my journal about a healthy habit I'd recently adopted. Today, at 69, I realize I've spent most of my life trying to be what others wanted me to be. The devoted wife, the dedicated mother, the private banker. Always ready, always submissive, always afraid to hurt. Now I'm finally learning to be myself. I'm discovering that Myers is stronger, braver, more capable than I ever thought. I can't get back the money Richard took from me over the years. I can't get back the years spent in a stifling marriage to Edward. But the time I have left, just me, fearless, unmanipulated, unregretful. The next day, Christina emailed me. She'd spoken with other women who'd been through similar things. They suggested starting a support group. I immediately agreed. Our first meeting was at a cafe near the beach. We were 5 women, stories of financial and emotional control from husbands, sons, and siblings. We shared our pains, our victories, both small and large. At the end of the meeting, Marilyn said, "You should formalize this, an association and NGO. There are so many women out there who need these stories." The idea quickly took shape. Within a few months, Start Over was officially founded, a nonprofit organization supporting women who have been financially and emotionally abused. With my embroidery skills, I created our logo, a colorful dove rising from the ashes. Over 50 women attended our first public event. I was nervous as I stepped onto the small, impromptu stage. My voice strengthened as I spoke. I am Myers Meneses. I am 70 years old. For nearly 7 decades, I let others control my life and my money. First my husband, then my son. Until one day, when my son asked for 400,000 pesos, almost everything I owned, something inside me broke and reformed. I looked at the audience's faces. It's never too late to say no. It's never too late to start over. And it's never, never too late to discover who you are without anyone else's approval. Applause boomed. 2 years after my escape, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Richard. The writing was more composed, less impulsive. "Mom, it's strange writing that word now. I may have lost the right to use it. I'm not writing to apologize. I know I don't deserve it. But I started therapy in prison. The therapist is pointing out patterns I couldn't see before. That I'm repeating what my father did to you. That I see people as means to an end. I'm not apologizing. I'm just accepting the truth. And the truth is, You were right to leave me to deal with the consequences. I won't blame you if you throw this letter in the trash. Just know this. I saw your photo in the newspaper speaking to women. You look different, stronger. I read the letter over and over, filled with conflicting emotions. Wariness, knowing Richard's capacity for manipulation, sadness mourning what might have been, and a surprising glimmer of hope. I didn't respond immediately. I took that letter to my therapy, another healthy habit in my new life. What do you want to do? The therapist asked. I don't know. Part of me wants to believe you've truly changed. The other part reminds me of how many times I've been deceived. What if both are true? She asked. Maybe he's really trying to change, but it's not safe for you. So you can accept change without reconnecting. These words stayed with me for days. Finally, I wrote a short reply. Richard, I received your letter. I can't say I trust your words. Broken trust is hard to mend. But I appreciate you seeking help and reflecting on your actions. I've dedicated my life to helping women who have gone through what I've been through. I've found purpose and peace there. I hope you find your way too. If this path is real change, maybe we can talk someday. Not as mother and son, but as two people trying to be better. I sent the letter without much expectation. Months passed without a response. That was okay. My life no longer depended on Richard or the shadows of the past. Spring brought vibrant colors to Cancun. Restart grew. We had a small office downtown and volunteers. We started offering free financial education workshops twice a week, things I had to learn from scratch at 70. Fiona frequently supported me by sharing stories about her own financial and emotional recovery. I dedicated Saturday afternoons to my grandchildren. They now visited regularly. Luke, approaching 10, developed an interest in astronomy. Marianne, at 8, took an interest in my embroidery. One day while we were working together, she asked, Grandma, are you happy now? I put down my needle and looked at her. Curious eyes and innocent face. Yes, honey, I said sincerely. I'm much happier than I used to be. Even without your grandparents. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes, Marianne, to find ourselves, we have to let go of the people we love. That doesn't mean we don't love them. It just means we have to love ourselves too. She frowned slightly. She thought with childish wisdom. Just like sometimes I don't want to be alone in a room. Even though I love playing with Luke. I smiled. Exactly. That June, I received an unexpected call. Detective Grant. Ms. Meneses, your son will be placed on a semi-open regime next month. I was caught off guard. Additional charges. He's been good. Completed his rehabilitation programs, and his lawyers have reconsidered his sentence. There will still be severe restrictions, but he'll be able to work during the day. When I hung up, a sense of unease rose within me I hadn't felt in a long time. Richard would be partially released. What did this mean for me, for Fiona, and for the children? I called Marilyn. Should I be worried? I asked. Marilyn, as practical as ever. We'll increase security at the apartment a bit. But honestly, I don't think he'll do anything. He'd have too much to lose. A week later, another letter arrived from Richard. It was different from before, formal and distant. Myers, I'm being moved to a semi-open regime next month. I wanted you to hear it from me, not from anyone else. I'll be working on the reforestation project during the day. I'll be back at the prison at night and on weekends. I don't plan on calling you or interfering with your life. I learned the hard way. My therapist says the first step to a healthy relationship is respecting boundaries. I'm trying to practice that. I also correspond with Fiona about the children. Their therapist has approved a supervised correspondence. Maybe I can see them one day when it's safe for them. I noticed that she didn't say Mom at the beginning or end. She was genuinely trying to establish a new dynamic. She was accepting our old relationship as irretrievably broken. I shared the letter with Fiona on the next video call. She confirmed that they had exchanged letters with the children. Their therapist thinks it's important not to completely demonize the father, she said. And his letters are different. He asks about the children's interests. He doesn't manipulate. There are no empty promises. I asked, do you think he's really changed? She shrugged. Maybe. Or he's just become more subtle. So everything is supervised. She paused. Will you respond to this letter? I thought briefly. Yes. I'll state that I'm aware of the situation and that my boundaries remain the same. My response was brief. Richard, thank you for letting me know. I wish you well in this new phase. I'm glad you're having controlled interaction with your children. If this father can be a healthy and positive presence in their lives. As I said, I've found my way and I hope you do too. Myers. It was a sweltering Wednesday in July. I received an unexpected call. Ms. Myers, Sophie from the Prison Rehabilitation Center. There's a situation regarding your son, Richard Meneses. My heart raced. He's physically fine, but there was an incident at work today. He got into an argument with another inmate and refused to respond when provoked. He walked away and found a supervisor. This could make him a target for other inmates. We're concerned about his safety. What does this have to do with me? Richard would like to be transferred to a safer project, preferably one where he can work alone or under direct supervision. There's an opening in a public square renovation program near your neighborhood, but because of your history, we need your approval. I was silent for a moment. Richard hadn't responded despite the provocation, something the old Richard wouldn't have done. Now he was asking for my help. Did he specifically want to work near me? No. He even stopped when I mentioned the location and asked if there were any other options. But this is the only project that would be safe for him right now. This surprised me. He was genuinely trying to respect my boundaries. Distance from my apartment? About 15 blocks. He won't be allowed outside the project area. He'll be monitored. I took a deep breath. Okay. I approve. After I hung up, I questioned my decision. Was I being naive again? Or was I showing compassion while still maintaining my boundaries? I confided in Marilyn. You did the right thing, she said. Keeping someone who's trying safe doesn't mean letting down your defenses. It means being human. The following week, Richard began his work in the square. I changed my route to the market and watched from afar. He was planting young trees in the sun. He was thinner, his arrogance gone. He glanced up briefly as if sensing my presence, but I didn't approach. In August, another letter arrived. Myers, I know you saw me in the square a few weeks ago. Thank you for not approaching me and for approving my transfer. The work has been therapeutic. Transforming a disused space into something beautiful and useful brings deep satisfaction. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I wanted to express my gratitude for this small act of kindness. The letter was more focused, less manipulative. I responded symbolically. The next day, I left quality gardening tools and a book on urban landscaping in his name at the headquarters overseeing the project. No note, no expectations. Weeks passed in silence. That was okay. I'd learned that healthy relationships don't expect immediate, calculated responses. In September, Starting Over held a weekend financial independence workshop for women. I was the keynote speaker, sharing my journey from complete dependency to financial autonomy. The room was packed with nearly 100 women in the morning. I took the stage with that familiar mix of nerve and determination. Good morning. I'm Myers Meneses. At 70, I'm learning who I am when I'm not defined by the men in my life. The room laughed politely. Many heads nodded in agreement. 3 years ago, my son came knocking on my door and demanded 400,000 pesos, almost my entire existence. As he had done so many times before, he assumed I couldn't say no. These patterns don't start out of the blue. They've been cultivated for decades. In my case, it started with my husband controlling every penny and decision, convincing me that I couldn't manage my own life. As I spoke, I saw movement at the back of the room. A tall, thin figure had entered silently and stood by the door. My heart quickened as I recognized Richard. For a moment, I lost track of my speech. The audience noticed my distraction. Some turned to look at what I was looking at. I took a deep breath and continued. The hardest and most liberating moment of my life was when I finally said no. When I walked out the door with a suitcase and swore I wouldn't become an extension of someone else's bank account. I spoke for another 30 minutes, conscious of Richard's silent presence in the back row. He didn't approach. He listened. When he finished, I received a standing ovation. Women came up to share their stories, ask for advice, offer thanks. Richard waited in his place, slowly approaching as the crowd dispersed. He looked uncertain with a vulnerability I'd never seen before. Hello. he said simply. Hello, I said. Your speech was powerful, he said. Painful to listen to. He paused. Thank you for the gardening tools. There was an awkward silence. Two people who had once been so close, now almost strangers. Where did you hear about the event? I finally said. Fiona mentioned it in a letter. I asked for special permission just to hear about it. I nodded. I noted his respect for my boundaries, his request for permission. Are you okay? I asked, genuinely curious. I'm different, he said thoughtfully. I'm learning to live with the consequences of my choices, to exist without manipulation. He looked into my eyes. It's harder than I thought. It usually is, I said. He checked his watch. I have 2 hours off. He paused. You've turned something terrible into something meaningful. Pride isn't the right word. I'm impressed. Inspired. Maybe. As he turned away, I found myself saying, Richard. He turned. Would you like to grab a coffee someday? I said. Somewhere in public. Of course. The surprise on his face was genuine. I'd love to. That's not a reconciliation promise, I clarified. Just a chat. I completely understand, he said. More than I deserve. A week later, we met at a crowded cafe near the square where he worked. A plainclothes guard was sitting at a few tables, a requirement of his conditional leave. The conversation was halting. We were treading new ground. We were no longer mother and son in the traditional sense. We were two adults trying to forge a new bond. How are the grandchildren? She asked when the coffees arrived. Good. Luke's taken up astronomy. Marianne's learning the flute. She smiled slightly. He mentions it all the time in his letters. Fiona sent a few recent photographs. I took a sip and asked the question that had been gnawing at me. Richard, what happened? When did you start seeing people merely as resources to be exploited? He stared out the window for a long time. His profile reminded me eerily of his father. I guess I always was, he said finally. As a child, I watched how my father treated you. That's how he got what he wanted. He seemed effective. He paused. At school, at university, at work, the manipulation worked until it didn't. And now? I'm learning now that influence isn't everything. Real relationships require reciprocity, not exploitation. He looked me in the eye. People are not a means to an end. We talked for about an hour. There were no big revelations, no dramatic reconciliations. Just two adults sharing honest experiences, perhaps for the first time. As we said goodbye, he said, Can we do this again someday? Maybe, I said. One step at a time. I considered meeting Marilyn the next morning, walking on the beach. Do you think she's really changed? She's trying, I said honestly. And that's something Edward never did. And are you ready to forgive? I watched the waves break on the shore, the constant rhythm of destruction and renewal. Forgiveness isn't something you give all at once, I said finally. It's a daily practice. I'm learning to forgive her, and myself for allowing so much for so long. That evening on the balcony, I wrote in my journal. Today at 70, I realized that life rarely offers perfect endings. There's no guarantee that Richard has truly changed, nor that he will stay that way. There's no guarantee that I won't fall back into old patterns in my moments of weakness. But maybe life isn't about perfect endings. Maybe it's about starting over as many times as necessary. It's about breaking toxic cycles, even if they seem impossible. It's about believing that we are more than just our worst moments or our most painful mistakes. The money my son asked me for 3 years ago was the price of my freedom. A high price, but infinitely less than the price of being trapped in a life that isn't my own. Today, I'm not financially rich. I live modestly. I make do with embroidery and small savings. But I am rich in another way. In true friendships, in purpose, in inner peace, in courage I never knew I had. The lesson I want to leave my grandchildren, every woman I meet, is this. It's never too late to say no. It's never too late to rediscover who you are. Not to please others but for yourself. It's never too late to start over. At my age, I am not finishing my story. I am just beginning to write its most authentic chapters. I closed the diary as the sunset painted the sky orange and purple. The doorbell rang. To celebrate, Marilyn said as she entered, a bottle of wine in hand. To what? The day you said no 3 years ago. 3 years of freedom. We smiled and raised a glass. To courage, I said. To Myers, Marilyn corrected. To Myers finally living his own life. Now before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and tell us in the comments where you watch this video. We love to hear how far our stories go.